has challenged some of the assumptions that I certainly saw 6 or 7 years ago. When we look at like the UK versus other markets, we're quite a long way behind on those things.
But I'm wondering, looking at these stats, whether there's a bit of a hare and a tortoise thing going on.
I'm kind of thinking ahead about like what does the third stage look like. Digital transformation is about taking the technology and transforming the relationship with the client. A lot of what has happened will deliver a degree of additional profitability because you increase efficiency. But what it doesn't do is...
Ian Phillips is a bona fide veteran of the accounting software space. In a sales career that spanned nearly 20 years, Ian has spent 8 of those at Xero as a field salesperson, progressing through into head of field sales and now into head of sales generally for Xero UK. Now, what really sets Ian apart from his counterparts in sales is his ability to listen, connect the dots from various different customers' source points, and then really come out with fantastic insights that he can then share for the benefit of his colleagues and his customers. So it was great to sit down today and talk about the Industry Insights report that Xero's just published on the accounting and bookkeeping professions. So without further ado, let's get into it. Ian, so thanks so much for sending across the advanced copy of the Industry Performance Report for 2023. I've had a quick look through it. Appreciate you only had it 5 minutes before I did, and there'll be a ton of stuff that I've missed. There's a few things that I've picked out I'm really, really keen to ask you about. I think my contention for a while has been that accountants have been very, very good at buying technology, but we haven't really seen that flow through into solid benefits like revenue and profitability yet. You feel free to disagree if you do, but I think, yeah, it's still not really materialized. But this report tends to show otherwise, right? That it's starting to happen probably more at the larger scale where people are applying in mid-tier to large firms where they're getting that benefit across a range of clients. But it's certainly good news, it seems, right?
Yeah, I really like this concept, and you and I will have talked about this before, Lee, of critical mass. When you're introducing new technology, and one of the interesting things about cloud is that you can do it quite incrementally, right? Even with compliance software, you could, if you want to, choose to move a block of your clients onto a different compliance tool. But when you do that initially, you are introducing a new way of working, a new workflow, even if it's more efficient, it is probably going to initially make you more inefficient. And you do need to be able to reach that point of critical mass where you've got enough of your clients using data capture software, or enough of your clients using cloud bookkeeping, or enough of your clients being channeled through one compliance workflow before that's going to start to feed through. And it feels like that kind of incremental change. I don't think it's accelerated, but we're kind of getting to a point where people are starting to recognize that they are seeing benefits.
And I would hope that reports like this will actually start to exponentially increase it, because as firms can start seeing that it does translate into profitability, well, therefore it justifies the need for investment into this part of the business. So putting cost and energy behind project management to get this stuff rolled out. I was speaking to Ryan Piercy the other day, and he was talking about the fact that because his team had an investment behind it, they said, right, we're going to go and do this. It's intentional. We'll think we'll see the benefits. We're going to put some cash behind and get going. That was instrumental to getting them to where they need to be. And I think when people can see these numbers on these reports, they can then justify to themselves, right, it's worth putting some effort and time and money behind this, right?
Yeah, but that's where it's really interesting when you look at the different sizes of firms, because I think that the kind of early adopters tended to be smaller firms who were agile enough that they could make a decision and say, I'm going to do this, and they would just do it. But now what we're starting to see is medium and large firms are the ones that are benefiting more. And I wonder whether that is because they can more easily make that decision to say, we are going to put some resource behind this. We're going to pull someone away from other work and get them to focus on driving this change through the business.
And that was sort of my working assumption for a long while, was that it was the micro firms and the small firms that were really leading ahead with this because it was easier for them to adopt change, and it was a bigger challenge for the medium to large firms. But some of the stats in here seem to suggest otherwise, which is really, really interesting. So one of the ones that I picked out was that only 77% of micro firms are using cloud for bookkeeping, which for that category, for that question, was way below the average from the other firms. I think the rest were up and over 90%. And so I was really fascinated by that. Do you have any more insight in that in terms of conversations you've had with firms?
I think that probably is just an indicator of how long the tail of really small firms
Sure.
are within accountants and accountancy and bookkeeping, right? So, and it is accountancy and bookkeeping in that report. And I guess within that very long tail of very small firms, there's a load of diversity. And I think broadly speaking, my experience would be that within that you have got people that have been doing it for ages and
Mm.
aren't that interested in growing, changing, etc., etc. But then you probably also got people that have left a position in a larger firm and want to go and do something completely different. So you probably got like quite a contrast of profiles within that kind of sole trader stroke small firm sector, and that is probably what's causing that real difference in adoption.
Yeah, I mean, I've connected a couple of dots here, and I might be misinterpreting it, but when you see that it is the small firms that are leading in terms of the record keeping service, right? So it tends to be the micro firms that are doing that more than the others. And then you look at the fact that internally they're probably least likely, maybe part of it's because of that long tail that you've mentioned, but they seem to be least likely to be using cloud bookkeeping tools. And then also they're also the same bracket that are seeing the lowest increase in revenue and profit as well. And so for me, it's like, well, they're doing more of this type of work. On the whole, they're failing to use cloud technology to deliver it and therefore possibly automate it. And then that's showing a sort of stalling in the revenue growth or even decreases in some cases. Like, is that, am I putting the wrong dots together there, or does that commentary sort of fit with what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have had this conversation before about disruption, right?
Yeah.
And one of the challenges when it comes to change within this sector is that there's no shortage of work, and there isn't always necessarily a desire to grow revenue and to grow profitability. And there probably are, quite a few people that are reasonably happy with the status quo. And I guess in a world where if you lose a client, you'll probably quickly gain another one to replace them. The kind of real kick up the backside is not necessarily going to come from the client side of things. And I I've been wondering out loud a few times whether actually some of the really interesting stuff will come from staff. But
Mm.
again, if you're at that real kind of small end, then you may not be an employer anyway. So you may not be kind of experiencing any sort of disruption that is making you think, I really need to do this right now. And that might automatically push you towards the kind of latter half of the adoption curve.
I noticed medium firms seem to have really overcome quite a bit of change, according to the stats, both around their billing processes and also their client experience as well. I was really interested to see that the medium firms are quite far away, actually, in the rest of the categories in converting these tools into better client experiences, as long as I've interpreted that correctly. Like, are you seeing some key things that they're doing in that group that other firms, maybe micro firms, can learn from?
I was really interested to see that as well, Lee, because I guess when you and I were both account managers together, I guess one of the things that I struggled with a little bit is medium firms, because they were almost not agile enough to make the decision that a small firm could make to say, I'm just going to do this. And, the time that is required is not that significant because I've got a smaller number of clients or whatever, and less people to convince. And they weren't large enough to go, I'm going to make someone a cloud champion full time. So I do think it's really interesting. And I guess the only thing that I could say is that it's possibly, just time. Maybe the pandemic has had an impact there. Maybe that has challenged some of the assumptions that I certainly saw, 6 or 7 years ago, that people would make about their own clients and their ability to kind of consume this kind of technology. Uh, maybe, maybe, despite the fact that MTD for ITSA didn't happen, maybe some of that kind of regulatory push had an impact as well.
I think it's really, really interesting. I remember a slide from the early days of Xero, and there was you probably remember it, the shark and the little fish, right? And it's like the fast will eat the slow was always always the thing that we went to. And I guess when you look at the technology world, it makes perfect sense. But I'm wondering, looking at these stats, whether there's a bit of a hare and a tortoise thing going on, right? So the quick and the nimble micro firms have adopted or certainly taken on tech, maybe struggle to adopt it, whereas the medium to large firms have taken their time, maybe done it more intentionally, and are now starting to see the benefits. Is that a fair assumption,
Well,
or do you not quite think it's that clear cut?
yeah, well, that shark slide was kind of printed onto the adoption curve, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about the characteristics of the different segments of that adoption curve, the first people to go are innovators, but innovators are not necessarily the people that get the most ROI from technology, because they kind of are drawn to it like a moth to a light. So they don't necessarily adopt technology with intent to benefit from it. They adopt technology because it's shiny and it's new. So perhaps there are some people out there like that are kind of flitting around from one piece of technology to another, whereas early adopters and then the early majority do tend to be the people that do things more intentionally, albeit a bit more conservatively.
What do you think is the next stage, right? So after these stats come out and people digest them, what do you think the small firms or the firms that aren't seeing the profitability in the revenue, what can they learn from their counterparts that are enjoying those benefits?
Yeah, so I think there's some really interesting stuff around services in the report. So, what do clients want? How do you differentiate yourselves? How do you ensure that you're making uh, making money from your existing client base, and how can you use technology to do that? I think there's some commentary in there from Richard Sargent
Mhm.
around kind of the first stage of cloud adoption being about getting some of your clients onto cloud bookkeeping software. The second stage being about starting to look at internal workflows. I'm kind of thinking ahead about like what does the third stage look like, which I think is about revisiting those clients and making sure that they're utilizing the technology properly. So I think there's some interesting stats around what I would see as like pretty fundamental features of cloud bookkeeping software, bank feeds, data capture tools, payment services tools. And I think when we look at like the UK versus other markets that Xero operates in, we're quite a long way behind on those things. So I think there's like a bunch of optimization that needs to happen on the technology front so that people are really set up to deliver. And that kind of ties into like another conversation I've had with you before around like the difference between digitization and digital transformation.
Yeah.
So I think I think a lot of what has happened is that people have transferred existing processes online, and that will deliver a degree of additional profitability because you increase efficiency. But what it doesn't do is fundamentally change the relationship with the client, which is then the kind of piece that allows you to go on and deliver revenue growth.
I want to come back to that digitization versus digital transformation in a second. But one of the other stats I just wanted to ask you about before we move on from the report was the amount of new client growth across all of the firms. It seems that across the board in this report, all are experiencing growth in new clients. It doesn't really seem that any of those categories are losing clients. And so what I'm curious about is, do you think that's because it's Xero firms that were being surveyed and they're taking maybe clients away from non-Xero firms or non-digitized firms? Or do we think there's actually an expansion in the amount of clients and the amount of businesses out there and a real growth in the number of potential clients?
Yeah, so we did survey non-zero firms as well as zero
Okay.
firms. So and I think there are some statistics in there that in the report generally that show why Xero firms do tend to outperform their peers. But I'm not sure, other than like this concept that if you are somebody that is on Xero, you will look for somebody that is a Xero expert.
Mm.
I'm not sure that it's the former. I do. It's interesting that it could be the latter in a world where we have got severe economic challenges and high levels of business closures. So perhaps I read a separate report that Accounting Web had produced around capacity, and it seemed like a lot of the strain on capacity is coming from like additional compliance and regulation, and perhaps that's hitting small businesses as well. I also wonder whether, and I used to hesitate to use this comparison, but actually a bookkeeper used it with me the other day. I also wonder whether there are more people that are willing to pay somebody to do something they can't be bothered to do themselves. So like for the same reason that more people have got a cleaner these days, then there might be more demand there. But it's fascinating to me that like whatever happens to the economy, there seems to be no shortage of work in this small business space for accountants and
Absolutely.
bookkeepers.
And so I'm very grateful. I got a bit of an advanced copy of this, and it was about 2 hours before we started recording, which I think was probably 2 hours and 5 minutes before you got the final version. So it was really good of you to get that across to me. But I've had a good rummage through, and there's notes. I've found some stuff, but certainly there'll be some insights in there that I've missed. What I'm really curious about is what are the things that you picked out from this that you find really interesting?
Good question. So there are a few things. One of the things that jumped out at me is that bookkeeping is often the biggest revenue stream for accountants and bookkeepers. So if you remember, 7 or 8 years ago when you and I were working together, I think it would be fairly common for an accountant to turn their nose up at bookkeeping work.
Absolutely.
So that's really interesting. And again, to link that back to technology, you wonder whether that's because those kind of data capture and bookkeeping and compliance workflows are now kind of intrinsically linked, whereas in the past they're quite distinct from each other. I guess like I'm really interested in the talent stuff. So like I think most firms would put the ability to attract and retain talent somewhere near the top of their list of challenges, and I think it's really interesting. Like I've always kind of I was always kind of said, look, like if I was just coming out of university now and I joined a firm, really excited to start work, my first day in an accountancy practice, and had grown up, using all sorts of technology, and somebody put 60 pages of bank statement on my desk and said, type this into an Excel spreadsheet, I'd probably think, what on earth have I signed up to here? And it is interesting that we're starting to see like job satisfaction being ranked more highly with those firms that are kind of engaging more with cloud technology. And then one of our big interests at Xero is like connecting these workflows. So those firms that are using some kind of data capture tool, which flows into Xero, which flows into Xero Tax, accounts production, tax, overseen by Xero Practice Manager, and then ecosystem tools. Those seem to be the firms that are registering the highest levels of job satisfaction. So that was really interesting. And then I guess the last point is probably just back to that idea of like bank feeds. Like bank feeds are a pretty basic tool, and we have pretty low levels of adoption given that we've got open banking in the UK. And I think that feels like a bit of a call to action for us and hopefully for our partners as well, like quite a basic way that you can improve that flow of information between the client and yourself, make things easier for them.
And that job satisfaction was a really stark stat on the report. And obviously the medium and larger firms are really running away with that, which again, I was very, very surprised to see such a difference. Do you think that all comes down to workflow and things like bank fees? Or do you think that those firms are doing other things to ensure that their team are feeling really good about the work that they're doing?
Comes down to workflow and technology. I think those are enablers for making the work more interesting. So I think I imagine it's about what you're being asked to do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I've talked before uh, about Drive. I'm sure you've read that book, and you kind of got to take money off the table first. Like, money is important to people, and you've got to acknowledge that. But then it's kind of about autonomy. It's about purpose. Like those are like two big things for me. So I wonder whether, like, those medium and large firms are managing to tune their staff into, this is why we exist, and this is your part in it. It's difficult to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, is there anything from the firms that you're working with that you're hearing them saying, "Look, we're being intentional about the mission, we're being intentional about values, we're communicating more," or is that something, I guess, that you'll see over the next period of time as you maybe follow up on these results?
I think that people are definitely being more deliberate and have got the time and resource in that kind of, in the large firm space, about talent strategies and about saying what is our employer brand? Why should somebody want to come and work for us, and why will somebody stay? And then, like I guess the things that kind of flow out of that are multiple, right? Whether it's employee benefits, whether it's about purpose, whether it's pay, whether it's about offices, whether it's about flexible working, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose bigger in scope than we've got to got time to cover today. So, like, moving back to that point that you mentioned a minute ago, then about digitization versus digital transformation. Just expand on that a little bit. What does that mean for anyone that doesn't know?
Yeah. So uh, I guess digitization is really about using new technology to do the same thing more efficiently. So at Xero, we see this a lot, where people have got below the VAT threshold. They'll have a load of clients who show up once a year with a spreadsheet or a bag full of records. And the conversation with them is often about, well, how do we make that efficient for you in terms of how you process those records once a year so that you can produce a set of accounts and a tax return. But for the client, nothing has really changed there. They still show up once a year with a bag full of rubbish or a spreadsheet. Uh, they may get chased for that information in a slightly different way, but in terms of the service that they get and the experience that they get, it's pretty much the same. And I think that kind of concept of digitization is debatable. I guess the big debate is, does that need to happen before you digitally transform? And then, are there batches of clients who are just happy as they are and will never need to change the relationship that they have with their accountant or bookkeeper? But I guess digital transformation is about taking the technology and transforming the relationship with the client. So the client noticing a difference, whether that's, the frequency with which they interact with their accountant, the outputs that they get from their accountant. And I guess it's harder, right? Because the minute that the client is involved in that change process, you've kind of got a job to do to bring the client along with you as well as well as your kind of practice staff.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it's infinitely easier to tarmac an existing road and make it a bit smoother than it is to go and like plow a completely new one. But what we're seeing here is that that's where the benefits are, right? If indeed you're interested in growing revenue, growing profitability as a firm, which, like we've said, not everybody is, and that's fine. But if that's the direction you want to go in, it is going to be plowing that new road. And so, with the firms that you've worked with that have successfully done that they've switched from, whether they've digitized first and then moved over, or whether they went straight down that route, what are the characteristics in those firms that really set them up for success with that?
So do you remember when we used to do disc profiling, Lee, at
Yeah.
Xero? So for those people who might be listening to this that aren't aware, it's about looking at kind of working styles, and you answer a bunch of questions, and then you're kind of put into a bracket, either D, I, S, or C, and D is kind of direct and to the point, which is probably me. I is kind of influence and loving spending time with people and gregarious and that sort of thing. C is kind of compliance oriented, so liking to follow a process, and S is kind of service oriented. And the reason I mention that is because I think people assume that a lot of people running firms of accountants are quite compliance oriented. That's not my experience. My experience is that they're very service oriented, and actually they are pretty passionate about the service that they deliver to their clients, or what their clients perceive of them, but also to their staff as well. And I think the people that do this successfully kind of resist the view that rocking the boat with clients and staff is always a bad thing. So they probably do tend to be, in this terms, a little less service oriented and a bit more willing to kind of make things happen. And I do think that debate is interesting. I've seen it. I've seen the debate about should you have a single platform, should you not have a single platform. Again, we probably don't have time to go into that and discuss that today. But I think fundamentally the people that do this well understand that the software that they know best is probably going to be best for their clients, and they're not afraid to advise them to move on to it. And they invest in making sure that they've got the expertise within their firm to advise people on how to get the most out of it. For example, like in that report, payment services, payment services is such an obvious and easy way to add value to your clients. Get them paid more quickly, make sure that they're offering a more kind of professional service to their clients. But adoption levels are pretty low. But I think you'd find in those people that have kind of digitally transformed their practice and the service that they're offering, that the adoption rates of payment services would probably be pretty high.
So it sounds like if I'm stuck, then I think I really want to go this new route. I actually want to increase the client experience. I want to start looking at payments, profitable stuff, but I'm stuck where I am. It's maybe getting over that hurdle of being more prescriptive to the client, being prepared to be more prescriptive to the client about the way it's working. And I suppose it makes sense, right? Because you wouldn't go into many businesses and you tell them how it's going to work. Like I wouldn't go into a carpet shop and tell them how they're going to fit the carpet, right? They're going to say, right, this is how we're going to do it. And you either buy it or you don't. I think accountancy is a bit of a strange beast from that perspective, isn't it? Where it's like, well, we'll try and be accommodating. But if you're uncomfortable doing that, like, would you advocate for bringing people into the team to drive this that are more of a D or a C profile as opposed to the S? If like you're not comfortable doing that, would you bring in people around you, or is it just learning to get over it and get it done?
I mean, perhaps is it, like one of the things that I find really interesting about accountancy, as someone that has been in sales for my entire career, is how few business development professionals exist within the sector, like regardless of the size of the firm. So I think there are arguments that there might be, like certainly in larger firms, some skill sets that you could invest in to make this stuff a little bit easier. But equally, I think that I would advocate people taking a helicopter view of their client base and trying to figure out where their wins are, rather than trying to kind of organically approach each and every client at year end. Because like the reality is, like, just slightly touching on that single platform, I think if you're any kind of like decent size of firm, it's probably unlikely that you will achieve single platform status, even if you want in any kind of reasonable timescale. So you've got to figure out how do I get to that point of critical mass when it comes to adoption of technology, and how do I go beyond that, and what does good look like, and then what's my easiest route to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not always an easy thing to do, is it? I think, again, more so than a lot of businesses, I feel that accountants and bookkeepers struggle to extract themselves and look at the business almost as a third party. That that cliche of working on the business rather than in it, right? It seems, I don't know why, but it seems to be a really, really difficult thing for them to do.
Yeah, I wonder whether that will change a little bit. I guess with some of the kind of private equity investment that you're seeing in accountancy, you're seeing the kind of management models changing a little bit in some of the larger firms, and you're seeing people move into more kind of corporate structures rather than the kind of partnership model. And I think the partnership model can hold people back sometimes because they see that they are running a business within a business, and then you never really benefit from the economies of scale that you should do from the size of the overall partnership.
I was at a bit of a loose end and had time on my hands the other week while I was waiting for my car to be repaired. And while I was pottering about in Costa, I just started knocking some numbers around and tried thinking about an accountancy firm through the lens of a SaaS sales leader, right? You look at the recurring revenue, the length of the time of a customer, and the sort of profit margins and stuff involved. And it seems really lucrative, right? And it's not a surprise that so much money is coming into it. And I wonder if businesses like accountancy and bookkeeping firms will start to become the darlings of investors where software has been in the past. And at the moment, we're sort of seeing maybe a step from that a little bit because of sort of economic factors. But it seems, and I've kind of put some numbers together, and no one really challenged me too much on the numbers, but where people came back and said, well, the reason we aren't growing that fast, either we don't want to, like it's a lifestyle business, or we just can't get the capacity and the people power to sort of drive that forward. Which I thought, at a time when you've got such a plethora of tools for automation and ways to make the work very interesting through those tools as well, it seems strange to me that capacity is still an issue. But maybe that's a naive point of view. I don't know. What do you think on that side of things?
Yeah, it's a big topic. I guess, if I was being kind, then I would say I understand that there will be a proportion of business owners within any kind of SMB space, and let's remember, like accountants and bookkeepers are SMBs themselves, who effectively own their job or have a lifestyle business, or are just happy where they are as long as they can pay their mortgage and for a pint and a curry on a Friday night or whatever. I guess the only thing that I would challenge about that I find slightly worrying is that if I put myself in the shoes of a client who does have that desire to grow and to do big things, I probably want to see that in my advisor as well. But I think I read the thread that you put on LinkedIn and I thought it was really interesting, and it did seem to be that people didn't necessarily challenge the opportunity. It's more the mindset of people to go and grab it and I guess ability to kind of invest in the right skills to go and do so as well. Again, I find that, coming back to that point about like sales and marketing capability, I've spoken to lots and lots of firms who are doing really good things when it comes to the brand and marketing. And it always strikes me that you probably in this marketplace, you probably don't have to do much to do things better and to start to capitalize on that opportunity as well.
Another thread that I posted, or a poll recently, I asked accountants what percentage, if you're a qualified accountant, what percentage of your day-to-day tasks can only be done by you, right? And it was really low, which suggests that the qualified staff are there, they're just tied up with other work. And so there are ways to get around the capacity issue. So for sales and marketing organizations came in and said, look, we like the inherent opportunity in the sort of financials of accounting practices. We've got the sales and marketing capability. We can figure out the resourcing, because if you were a back business like early days with Xero, if we said, well, we can't get the staff, well, we'll just go and solve it, right? It's a problem to be solved on the way to growth. And I wonder if fairly aggressive parties may come in and start to overtake some of those lifestyle firms and sort of rob them of that lifestyle business is sort of my worry, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because again, there seems to be so much work out there. I'd also say that one of the reasons that accountancy in particular is appealing to external investors is not just the growth potential and the kind of fragmented market that exists and the potential for growth through M&A, but I think it's about the business model and the fact that it does kind of generate often pretty predictable cash flows, and like the kind of relationships that accountants have with their clients, and whether that's contractually or personally, do tend to mean that people are going to change pretty infrequently. I remember a few years ago, we conducted a piece of research. We didn't do a load with it. I think we did a session at one XeroCon on it, and we went and kind of conducted an NPS survey with small businesses about their accountants. And like the thing that was really interesting for me about that piece of work is that a lot of people were not necessarily satisfied with their accountant, but when you asked them if they were going to leave, they said no. And I guess, you could look at that quite positively and go, well, what a resilient business model you've got. It's banking or whatever. But on the other hand, for those people that do want to grow, and are relying on word of mouth to do so, they might be relying on people that don't quite enjoy the service they're getting from them as much as they thought, just because they assume they'd leave if they weren't that happy.
Yeah, I suppose the positive way to look at that is, yes, resilient business model. The pessimistic way, and probably I'd confess this is the way I'm going to look at it, is that sets the conditions for complacency, which sets the stage for mass disruption, right? And that's what we saw, I think, in the tech space, where the incumbent vendors thought, well, people aren't going to leave. One day they will, right? One day something will come up, and it becomes a bit of a shock. And I think, as we've seen with those incumbents, it takes a good few years to recover, right?
Yeah, but I still think, particularly in that medium and large space, the disruption that is and will continue to happen is more around staff. And I've seen this time and time again. You get a Xero champion leaving a firm who is not taking investment in technology seriously because, frankly, they're fed up, and they go somewhere else, and that creates two firms who are probably taking technology more seriously.
Ian, we could chat about this all day. It's an absolutely fascinating topic. The report is out today, and where can people go and find that if they want to have a look at some of the talking points that we discussed?
So we'll be emailing it out to our partners that are signed up to marketing emails, and there will be a blog on the Xero blog.
Nice, fantastic. And if anyone wants to follow you or find out more about your work and what you're up to, what is the best place for them to do that?
Best place is LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter, for those of you that are interested in my more random witterings, which is iPips101.
Nice, fantastic. Ian, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Good to see you, Lee.